Good evening, everybody. And by
Yay!
everybody, I mean Aldous
Yes!
and
On the
me.
show and in the chat.
We coexist.
Exactly. Greetings! How we doing, man?
Well, I'm doing well, man. How are you doing? It's been a
I'm
hot minute. I think it's been like 3 weeks since our last
yeah, we seem to be settling into a nice groove of
of of once a month.
about once every fortnight that we managed to get on based off our respective schedules. So it's working out pretty good. I'm glad that here we are. We're already in September of 2023. I think we
Oh my
started doing
God,
this in May. So we have in the
we have
course of four
Mo
months,
Biggs.
we've managed to make it to the Battle of the Nile.
Yes, in the course of 4 months, and tonight's, I guess, an auspicious occasion because we've got a Mo Biggs in the chat, which
Mo
means I
will
need to
be pleased to know that there is no Weavery in the Battle of the Nile.
well, save my icon, which is my I. I've actually like fallen in love with this thing. I had Matt Kratz use a generator to do like Jojo Belisarius for our last one in Rome stream, and it turned out way better than it had any right being. And so now I just have Jojo Belisarius as my thing right now. It's good. It's good.
Well,
But
your mental illness of an appreciation of that Weavery shit will hopefully you'll grow out of it at some point. I'm sure.
it's not a phase, okay?
It's not a fave.
it's, it's, otaku is a lifestyle. We've gotten
Uh,
holy shit, we have a lot of people in the chat right now. What is
it's
going
and by
on?
a lot you mean more than two.
You know what? I'll take a win where I'll get it. All this. We've got Comics Mate in the chat. Good old Dean James. Good day, good day. Corey Barton joins us from the Upside Down land. Corey Barton, this is what I will say. I was telling all this behind the scenes. Corey has made it his mission to be like amidst the amidst the first people to be on these streams now after Aldous and I completely cut him off at the end when he came in at the end of our last stream.
It was
And
exceptional timing that right as we were closing out, he managed to slide in there.
and so Corey's asking if I read Kotaku. No, otaku is a term for like somebody who really enjoys anime and Japanese culture and everything
Yes.
like that,
Yes. Here in the States, we call those people degenerates.
or weebs,
Degenerates.
degenerate weebs.
That's repetitive.
Comics music JoJo's Belisarius adventure. Now he would still just be an SPQR character. He would just be Belisarius because he's awesome. But JoJo Belisarius is great. Um, but anyways,
Yeah.
yeah. So Battle of the Nile. So as a little bit of a recap, last time we were talking about the Battle of the Pyramids, which was a blast, and the way that we had actually done that format last time, I think, worked really well. Where all this had sent me a whole bunch of maps,
Yeah, I
everything.
did all the
So
work, and he just basically sits there as the slide projector operator. So,
yeah, exactly. Well, I provided like occasional commentary, and we got into some pretty cool discussion on like the use of musket as pike and everything like that. It was a good time.
there you go.
And
I will forgive Corey for his appreciation of the Eastern weeb stuff, but yeah, you get no such quarter.
I mean, fine. I've been taking the brunt of it forever. I made the book anyway, so
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, but last time we were talking about the Battle of the Pyramids. That was July 21st of 1798. We are fast forwarding all the way, if you can
man,
believe it.
all this, I'm not gonna bullshit. When you said July 21st, I was not expecting the like 17, like the 18th century date after. I was like, there's no way that that was the last time we streamed.
No, the Battle of the Pyramids occurred on the 21st of July, 1798. And France is riding high. They have a massive victory. It's the first time in military history that divisional square is not only utilized, but is actually utilized in a factor where we talked about it last time, where it's actually moving. We're going to fast forward all the way to the 1st through the 3rd of August of 1798. And tragically, this is where things for the adventures of the foreign army for France tends to start going south, no pun intended.
Corey, if I do not get protected from the Mo Biggs bans for weeb degeneracy, neither shall you.
There you go.
Boom.
So yeah,
Listed.
so Napoleon, after and then shortly after the Battle of the Pyramids, he's taken Cairo, and in messages back and forth with French Admiral Francois Paul Boudez de la Guerre, they argue back and forth about where the French fleet should be. De Guerre, commonly called, we'll just call him Bruez, wants to take the fleet away from Egypt so that he's out at sea, so he can better maneuver and navigate should the British find them. Napoleon wants the French fleet close, both for logistics reasons, if he needs immediate reinforcement, and then also for protection to make sure the British don't drop an army on his back as he's inland on Egypt. And so they come to a compromise. And at the end of the delta of the Nile is Aboukir Bay. And Aboukir Bay has this long curved land stretch that you can see on the map, and that goes out about 30 miles. And of course, the light portion that you see there, that light blue, because of where the Nile dumps into this Mediterranean here, there's a lot of silt, and that silt builds up over time, and then the currents move it around. So that whole area, they're commonly referred to as shoals and sandbars. It's rocky, it's sandy, and it's constantly changing. So as competent sailors, the French and the British and everybody knows to stay away from certain areas in this bay. And so Brudet does something that is tactically very smart at the time. He takes all of his ships, especially his 13 ships of the line, and he follows the curvature of the land curve of that bay, and he anchors in a long line. Now, so they've got the landward side to one side of them and the open sea to the other. While doing this, he then can move all of his guns from the landward side over to the seaside, so he's double gunned on that side. And because he's at lowered crew count, because he's got crew that are on land trying to forage and also do just the things that crew do, it secures his line. He chains all the ships together to ensure that if anything does happen, that they'll stay in formation. And he orders all the spars to be taken down. The spars are the cross masts. And he does this for multiple reasons. If the British do show up and there is a battle, He doesn't want those spars falling down on his gun crews. So he's going to fight basically just anchored in a line. And it's a good strategy. It's not an incompetent defensive position, because you have to understand it's very unlikely that the British would sneak up on them. This is the 18th century. These are all sailing ships, commonly referred to in this era as wooden ships and iron men. It's not uncommon that they would have forewarning. And in fact, when they do spot the British, they do have significant forewarning for what to do, because you're talking about hours from when you would first spot somebody until they would form up, and then you would go into combat. So he's been here for several weeks. He's been in this location anchored. He's got, like I said, shore parties going back and forth to get water and food. Almost 24 men from every ship at any given time are off the ship. So all of his ships are slightly less crewed than ideally they should be. And while all this is going on, Nelson is still frantically racing all over the Mediterranean trying to find the French fleet. He almost caught them at Malta, but he missed them. And since then, he's been trying to figure out where they go until he gets word that Alexandria has fallen. And so he takes his entire fleet and heads down. And this entire time, every message that Nelson's getting from the Admiralty, they're cutting him no quarter. This is not the Nelson from a few years from now. This is he's still just Horatio Nelson. He's not the magician, the magic hero. That aura hasn't been built up over him yet. He's still a very competent commander. He's very highly respected, but he's not at that level yet where he is completely unquestioned. And so he is being questioned by the Admiralty. So finally, they do get noticed. They find out where the French are, or generally are, and they head down towards that region. And it's on. They spot the French. The French actually spot them first, and then they see the French, and so they start to form up. And as the Zealous, the HMS Zealous, was actually the first ship to sight the French at anchor in Aboukir Bay. And it was around 2:45 when a flag signal was hoisted up to inform Nelson of the discovery. And at this point, the British are about 9 to 12 miles away from the bay, depending on how you want to measure, if you want to measure to the first ship or just the flotilla, as it were. But Nelson's ships are scattered. He's got to organize them and get them in order, get them in line of combat. The HMS Zealous and the Goliath were the two closest to the enemy, the French that were at anchor. The others are in small groups. So he starts organizing everything around. But previous to this, the two sailors aboard La Houreuse, at about 2 p.m., two French sailors sighted the British ships. They sighted the HMS Zealous. So Brueys has a lot of time. He assembles all of his commanders, and they discuss their options. Now, the wind is blowing in towards them. So the British have the advantage of wind blowing on to their position. So the French really have two options. They can pull up anchor. Now, again, every ship is undermanned, so they're already low crew. They could pull anchor, unchain the ships, and pull out and go out of the harbor. But as in their position right now, they're fairly secure. They've got the shoals to one side and the open sea to the other. They've got a strong defensive position. In addition to this, both Bruet and several of his commanding captains were suffering from cases of dysentery. Bruet's case was extremely poor, and his two captains post this in their notes, cite that they think that his well-being was affecting his judgment. And because at first they decide that they are going to take up sail and they are going to go off. But it's almost minutes later that Brueys countermands that order and decides that they are going to stay put. Now, if you read a lot of history on this, history is always written by the victor. And in the case of Western history, it is most oftenly always written with an extremely pro-British slant. And so, while I am Yeah, I am by no means an expert on naval combat, but in everything that I've read in the two or three books that have covered this, Bruet is absolutely slaughtered for his decision to remain at anchor. It's not a bad decision militarily, and there's two books that have come out semi recently that are starting to question some of the common misconceptions on why the French decided to make the choice that they did. Bruet's decision is not a bad one for multiple reasons. Like I said, the British already have the wind in their favor. If the French were going to be pulling out of the bay, it's going to be a slow, disorganized mess. Some of the lighter ships, their frigates, are definitely going to be tacking faster than their ships of the line. Let alone the L'Orient, which is their capital ship. It'd be a mess. So they're actually better off keeping cohesion and staying present. In addition to this, like I said, all the French ships are undermanned. So if they stay in their current position, they only really have to man one side of the ship. And they don't have their sails up, so they don't have to worry about damage control. Let alone having to deal with everything, have people up on the rigging for doing all your tacking and adjusting as you're at sail. So, now I guess the other thing that I should mention is that the British guns were a lot better than the French guns at this time. Not exceptionally so, but enough that it's going to make a difference for the results of this. So the British all start lining up. They're coming in. Like I said, Captain Thomas Foley of the HMS Goliath is the first to kind of nose the entrance of his ship towards Aboukir Bay. And interesting enough, Foley actually had out-of-date charts for Aboukir Bay. The estimate is that they were about a decade and a half old. And as he looked over his atlas, he realizes that they had made a major mistake. Now, it's arguable as to whether or not the mistake was because of the out-of-date atlas or if he just got really lucky. But he thinks that so all the French ships are in line. They're anchored at the bow only, not at the bow and the stern. And this allows them to swing anchor closer to the shoals. Now, if the French could swing freely, then there has to be enough deep water. And Foley's chart shows that the shoals are much closer to land on at this time. But again, it's an out-of-date map. So his idea is that he's going to, if the British can split their force and go on either side of the French line, then they can just double broadside them from both sides and devastate the ship. So the British start going in, and Brunet, again, as a sound military commander, had taken a small battery and placed it on the very point of Aboukir Bay, on Aboukir Island, and they fired a few rounds as Goliath comes in, but they fall short. They're not able to hit the target. Goliath comes in and sweeps past the lead ships, Les Guerres' bow, and while doing so, unleashes just an absolutely devastating broadside. And when you're talking ships of this era, you got to remember their cannons are on the sides, so that's why it's called a broadside. You would face one side of your ship to the other and then fire. When you would be in that position to release a broadside and you were shooting at another ship, and that ship, it's called crossing the T, and your broadside would be running the length of their ship, either from the bow or the stern, that would be called raking the ship. And what it is your guns are going down the entire length of that ship. And so this full massive battery from Goliath just completely devastates. It sweeps the entire length of the ship, absolutely devastates La Guerre, and they weren't ready for it for whatever reason, and the whole ship just goes into absolute chaos. Captain Troulet, which was Legre's master, had to stack piles of crates and other gear on the ship's landward side. So he's got crew that aren't manning their guns, just trying to stack gear on that side, trying to get the ship to level out because it's now listing. French sailors they're frantically throwing things overboard, trying to get things organized. And
So
so the British pour broadside after broadside through Laguerre's sides, and so now you've got wooden splinters flying everywhere. It's just like it's shrapnel everywhere. It's absolute carnage. So then more British ships start following Goliath in this narrow water that uh, the captain had, whether it's just by luck of Foley's chart or if Foley actually accurately saw the French ships drifting and listing. So multiple British ships start following them through this little tiny gap, and I think we've got a picture of that if you want to throw it up.
yeah,
Oh,
we'll do that,
well,
and
let
then
me
as
talk about this painting too. So this is what the French ships looked like in line. They've got all their sails are dropped and they're all in line anchored at the bow, and then they are chained together slightly so that they can hold their line. But that would be what it would look like. There's no sail, none of the French sails would be up. It would just be the masts. All the bowsprints are down, and most of the ships would be listing slightly seaward side.
awesome. And I think I've got the right map pulled up. But before we do that, we have some comments from the chat with some inquiry. Earlier, we had Corey Barton ask the ever important question of any babes on these ships, uh, which pairs with a more recent question by Mo Biggs, who was confused. Said, "Wait, the broadside isn't where they stow the winches."
No,
No, unfortunately not.
no,
Uh,
I apologize. I might have made my maps and diagrams a little too highbrow for those discussions. I will make sure I address that in the future, Mo.
and then we're saying pretty dang close in line. That's kind of the whole point is you create a wall of cannonade,
Yes.
and that messes people up because it's not fun getting shot by cannons.
No, no, it is not. If you've ever seen Master and Commander, there's two really great examples of what broadsides look like on the deck of a ship. And if you haven't
What?
seen Master and Commander, you need to go watch Master and Commander.
Yeah,
So
I was gonna say is like that is a must see. Really enjoy Master and Commander: Far Side of the World. Very
right.
underrated movie.
So if we
Um,
could get that map up.
yep, that's what I'm getting to. Believe it's this one, right?
Yes. So on the landward side, Goliath slips in and just devastates Laguerre. Now, reportedly, if you read the accounts of all of the captains, Foley had suggested this to Nelson prior as they're approaching in, and Nelson had wholeheartedly agreed with it because he had noticed this as well. Now, that's interesting because Nelson didn't show up in time to actually notice this and then communicate it to his officer because there's no radio. So, and they can only communicate so much with flags. So if this was indeed a strategy that Nelson had approved of, one, it's interesting because it's completely haphazard with how it's executed. It looks more like something that's very non-British. You see this a little bit more in British naval warfare, but even then it's pretty rare, and that's individual captains seeing an opportunity and exploiting it. In British military, this like never happens in this era. They're too regimented and structured. But either way, Captain Foley of the Goliath, sees this opportunity and exploits it. Following Goliath through this narrow passageway follows the HMS Zealous, which was the first ship to spot the French. Following the Zealous, the Audacious, the Orion, and the Theseus follow. And at this point, anybody that has been in naval combat pretty much already knows the battle's over. The only thing that's left now is the slaughter. The French have been completely outmaneuvered by the very fact that they cannot maneuver. They are in a line. Again, all of their guns are facing the seaward side. The ships, these 5 British ships that are now on the landward side, are basically completely unopposed and can just slowly rake and destroy and broadside the undefended sides of these ships. And so the French have been completely enveloped, and this occurs within about 30 to 40 minutes. That's
I
how
was
fast.
wondering if they were using smoke signals.
No, you wouldn't use smoke signals on a ship. You don't want fire, and ships don't work well. And in fact, we're going to talk about what happens when a
when
fire
fire
starts
ships.
on a ship, because it is probably the event that this particular fleet engagement is the most famous for. And so not only do the British sneak over on the landward side, the captain of the Zealous actually um, does something that's relatively insane for naval combat of this period in this type of situation. You,
Fucking no.
but so the captain of the Zealous actually drops anchor and goes in and starts just using his broadsides and positioning his ship using his anchor drift as a mobile gun platform. And so one of the French frigates that is anchored on the back end of the line at this point tries to come to the aid of the line that's immobile, because the frigates they were just anchored separately from the ships of the line. And the Solaris tries to come to the aid. She raises sails, and she actually engages the Goliath as she sails by. And Captain Foley is outraged. He is offended that a frigate would fire on him because he's a ship of the line, and a frigate has no duty or honor firing on him. A frigate should be fighting a frigate or a smaller boat. They have no right to shoot at him, and so he is so outraged by this impotence and this just absolute insult from the French sailors that Goliath actually stops firing at the British ships of the line, repositions herself, and according to the account of most of the sailors on board, Captain Foley screams and points, frothing at the mouth, to sink that brute. And Goliath sends a massive broadside into the French frigate. And there's multiple accounts that say that the Zealous joined in. And it is an understatement to say that Le Chareuse was damaged. She faced at least a double broadside from two British ships of the line. She was pulverized. She was annihilated. Her hull almost immediately gave way, and in minutes she sank completely. So it gives you an idea of the power here. Now, in the center of the French fleet, kind of towards the back end of the center, was the French capital ship, the L'Orient. And because of her position in the line, all ships are referred to as she, Corey.
Yeah, I was just about to type that into the chat.
Yeah.
All ships are considered feminine in gender.
Yes, it's contrary. I'm going to go off on a little rant here. Contrary to what modern parlance will have you believe, the reason that a ship is referred to as a woman is because all the sailors respect the hell out of her. And so
Yeah.
she's your matron, she's your mother. She's the woman you're in love with. She's the
Yeah,
one that you take care of. Exactly, boats and hoes. So as Bruet has had time, he gets his crew ready on the L'Orient, and her guns are all set, and Bruet does something that's not unheard of, but is very shrewd. He had enough time that he double-shotted all of his guns. And when I say double-shotted, that means not one cannonball was loaded into each cannon, two cannonballs were loaded into each cannon. And sometimes these two cannonballs would have a chain that was attached between them, and what that would cause is as they go flying, they become like a bola spinning through the air, only these are giant iron solid cannonballs with a huge chain between them, so it would just rip through the deck and the masts, and just, again, it just brutal. The brutality of this warfare cannot be undercut. And the French flagship's cannons erupt with an indescribable roar. And, by descriptions, it was like a dragon breathing fire. It was just the amount of flame that's shooting out of both sides of this massive ship just is unreal. And
Oh my.
Bellerophon, one of the British ships that followed Goliath in, absolutely gets obliterated. And she's reduced to a massless hulk that's slowly sinking. A little past 8 o'clock at this point, three more British ships join the action: the Alexander, the Swiftsure, and the Leander. The Culloden, which is the fourth British ship to appear, actually ran aground on the shoals. Now, it's even more interesting because the Culloden actually had up to date charts. And so, how he ran aground, but Goliath didn't with out of date charts is one of the massive mysteries that's kind of always confused and intrigued people on this particular engagement. But what Culloden does now do is she serves as basically a traffic cone. She's telling the rest of the British ships as they sail into the bay where the shoal is, and so they can avoid the shoal by just using Culloden as a marker. So now we're at the absolute height, and in this point, it becomes absolute chaos. It's not an organized battle. It's like 30 or 40 different battles going on. You've got individual ships that are fighting. You've got two ships that are fighting one ship, three ships that are fighting one ship, and it's constantly in motion. Everybody's drifting and firing. Only a couple of ships for the British side have laid anchor. And it is during this massive, hellish, just dervish of death and destruction and cannon fire that the tragic, probably it's a tragic event, but it's the one that this particular event is most known for. And because of the L'Orient size as a French flagship, she was obviously both a so L'Orient, because of her size, because she's the capital ship, she becomes a magnet for every British ship. I mean, you also have to keep in mind this is the black powder
No,
era.
are you saying all this that the British ships were fat shaming the L'Orient?
Yeah, yeah, they were.
How dare they?
Exactly. So,
Oh,
but because it's the black powder era, every time these cannons fire, there's the smoke is just more and more and more and more. It's getting hard to see, but the L'Orient, because of her size, you can still see her through the gleam. So not only is she the biggest ship, she becomes the biggest target.
hashtag Slay Queen.
There you go. And cannon fire just starts just obliterate. Just she gets pounded. She's getting pounded by British cannon fire, and the Swiftsure actually anchors near L'Orient's bow, and the Alexander takes a place at her stern, and they start raking her across with their broadsides. And the stern of these ships, and I wish I had a good picture, but I'm sure if you've seen some of the movies, whether it's Pirates of the Caribbean or Master and Commander, you can get an idea. The stern of these ships is where the stateroom was for the captain. They're extremely ornate, beautiful woodwork, massive windows, very gilded, almost Baroque in their level of detail.
Yeah.
And during this time that they had down, Bure had a maintenance crew that was touching up the paint on the back of L'Orient. And it is during one of the Alexander's broadsides that a fire starts in the stateroom at the rear of the L'Orient. And that fire is most likely caused by the fact that the paint was ignited that was being stored there.
Oof.
And so now the massive French flagship, it's reeling under a hurricane of shots. It's getting raked on both sides, front, from bow to stern, and ships are going back and forth. And at this point, Brouet has already been wounded by a wound to the forehead, and he redirects his attention away from ordering his gun crews on what to do to the fire that has now occurred at the stern, and he's yelling to the fire response crews to address it and get some men over there to put it out. And as he's screaming this command, a cannonball breaks through the side of the ship, not rolls, but flies just slightly above the decking and takes both of his legs out from underneath him, just below the
Yikes.
knees.
That's
And when I
tough.
say it takes his legs, it doesn't just take his legs off, it rips them asunder. And Brouet, ever the naval statesman that he was, immediately calls for a chair. And some of his men lift him up. They put him in the chair. He has tourniquets placed on his bloody stumps of his legs. And by all accounts, he says, in French, as a French admiral, I should die on the quarterdeck. And he's kept on the deck. He refuses to go down below. The fires are spreading throughout the ship. The crew's devastated. By all the accounts of those few that survived, and there was only a handful, Brueys did succumb to his wounds before the great warship did. And again, it's smoking. There's smoke everywhere from all the cannon fire. But the fires on this ship are it's like a signal flare for all more British cannons to coming in. Cannon, yeah, there you go. Seamen flying.
If they get pounded from all sides, you'll see seamen flying everywhere, Corey Barton.
Yeah, and by all reports, in the events leading up to the penultimate event, the Swiftsure, the Alexander, the Defense, the Goliath, and the Leander were all firing on L'Orient. And whether it was a stray cannonball, whether it was just the fires racing out of control, it's not known. But what is known is that eventually, somehow, the magazine of L'Orient exploded. And Le Tonnant and Le Heureuse and Le Mercutio cut the cables long before this event and tried to get away. The Alexander did likewise, but the Alexander had its anchor was caught and they couldn't pull it up. And surviving off Admiral Gauthiemer ordered abandoned ship. Sailors were diving off the L'Orient when the fire got out of control. Of the 1,100 men that were on L'Orient, only 60 would survive because at 10 p.m., the giant flagship exploded. And it didn't just explode, it was completely ripped apart. Debris from this flew in hundreds of feet into the air. It could be seen miles away. The sound was heard for miles away. It was just a cacophony of explosion followed by ash, wood debris, bits of bone, human flesh. Anything you can think of would be. It fell like an unnatural rain for over 20 minutes. And as this event happened, this is in the middle of the night. It's not middle of the night, but it's dark. It's 10 p.m. Sailors aboard the Alexander would state that you could, by the light of the explosion, calmly read a book. That was how illuminating it was. And the fighting completely stops for about 20 minutes after this. It was just, everybody was dumbstruck. Nobody had ever seen a ship of that size and a magazine of that size go up. And there's a little bit of discoherent fighting during the night, but almost everything's over by the dawn, and the bay is an absolute sea of carnage. Initially, the British fought with 14 ships of the line and 1 sloop. The French had 13 ships of the line and 4 frigates. The British lost 220 killed with about 677 wounded. They did not lose any ships. The French lost anywhere from 2,000 to 7,000 wounded or captured or killed. 2 ships of the line were completely destroyed. 9 ships of the line were captured, and 2 frigates were destroyed. It was an absolute devastating loss for the French, not just because of the manpower loss in the ships, but because Napoleon was now isolated. He did not have the cover of the French fleet. And tragically, right after the highs of the Battle of the Pyramids and his brilliant tactical victory, Napoleon, and this is something that happens throughout great military men's careers, when you rely on somebody else that's not as talented as you, failure erupts. And so now Napoleon is in a position that he dreaded, and he is isolated in Egypt. And Nelson has put yet another feather in his hat. Now, like I said, and I want to reiterate this, all of the Nelson fanboys will always say that it was his plan, but it's interesting that that there's no writing or notations on Foley doing this action until he gets into the bay. And then it seems to by me, based off the chart evidence and all of the citations that are given for the scene, that
Oh
I don't think it was
God.
planned. I think it was an independent motion. But
Mo Big says 7,000 men. Geez, well, at least they got access to the rich farmlands of Africa.
there you go. Well, I did mention L'Etournette. L'Etournette did manage to sail away, but it ended up running aground about a mile away as she tried to run away. Les Harus and Les Mercure were similarly grounded in their attempts to escape in the night. Le Franklin, which was named after Benjamin Franklin, held out for quite a while into the almost dawn hours fighting. Almost 2/3 of her crew were dead or wounded, and she ended up being a demasted hulk that held out for 3 days before she finally gave way to the British. And that's just partly honor on the British side. They're not. It's a disabled ship. They're not going to sit there and just shoot cannon at her. They just wait for her to run up her colors, and they could wait her out because the battle was such a one-sided victory.
Yeah.
So
Corey is saying they should have you narrate the new Age of Empires 4. I mean, you know, if they're listening.
there you go. But that's the Battle of the Nile. Probably the pretty much the most significant, well, the only most significant naval engagement of the Egyptian campaign,
Yeah.
and it's the devastation of the Mediterranean French fleet, and the event of Le Orient's explosion is what is kind of everybody will talk about, and if you read citations of this, they mostly talk about the explosion of Le Orient because it was just a massive explosion, and there really probably is no real way that we could truly understand how loud, how bright, or how amazing it would have been to witness, or how many people were truly died or killed
Yeah, like
by the explosion.
even just in the battle in general. I mean, that's the big thing with naval battles is there's a lot of, especially during this point in time, there is a lot of conjecture because it's like if you go overboard and there isn't an accurate manifest in the book in each of the ships, how many people are you actually losing? Um, but yeah, uh, this is going to be the beginning of the end for the Egyptian campaign for Napoleon. Up through this point, he's been very successful. Um, this is kind of where things start to go bad, but it's as we will get to it. Napoleon, the brilliant man that he is, effectively takes a victory out of the jaws of defeat, and when he comes home, the people of France certainly don't see him as a loser. He spends
Right.
this masterfully, um, which just goes to show, you can give that man shit and he'll turn it into gold. Uh, but Corey Barton says, I really don't like the woman narrator of Age of Empires 4. Felt like a lame classroom lesson. Every
Right.
time she spoke, takes the epicness away from the battles. Plus, it's lame that there's no Death Star in Age of Empires 4. I mean,
Well,
fair enough.
as I said, since I was going over the casualties, I mean, this is another interesting footnote. And it gives you an idea of how the French were caught by
Some
Goliath, by
some
Captain
per,
Foley's maneuver.
some
Um,
person's trying to get us to jump forward to Russia. Yeah, like the sad thing about this is like everyone goes after Napoleon for Russia, but when you really look at it,
he took
like
Moscow.
like Napoleon kicked the Russians' ass. That was the problem is they kept really does he even win,
In
does he
in order
even
to
lose a
win,
single battle?
no,
Like
in order to win, your opponent has to recognize they lost.
exactly. Well,
And the
it's
Russians never recognized they lost. There was not a single engagement that they. You could argue that Borodino was a very minor tactical victory, but you're going to be hard pressed to defend that thesis.
yeah. Well, it's like that's like that's the whole thing. Is it's like really, and this became the strategy with dealing with Napoleon. Is okay, yeah, you're going to beat us, but we have more troops and we have more provisions to keep throwing at you, and you're on a budget. Is effectively what the strategy of dealing with Napoleon will become after Russia. Is like, all right, well, we can't beat him, but we can keep showing up.
No, for sure. So
Um,
yeah, but this is Bellerophon was the ship that took the most damage from L'Orient's first broadside. It was completely demasted. Uh, Her crew alone suffered over 20% of the total British casualties and was devastated. The battle, this battle in particular, remains one of the Royal Navy's most famous victories, which says more about the Royal Navy than anything else, I think.
yeah,
But so yeah, that's the Cleopatra's Needle in London was raised in honor of this victory, and this would just go on to help Nelson's career. He was wounded in this engagement too. That is the one thing you can say about Nelson. He did not hide back. His ship
is
was
it,
always in
this
the
is
thick of
this is
it.
where he lost his arm, right?
I can't remember if it was or not, but I'm not a Nelsonite, so I don't follow all
Yeah,
the
no, I
details.
I gotcha. Because like Nelson is known very iconically for being a one-armed admiral, and like that is all of his famous portraits. He's got the one arm. But like, I was fairly certain that he lost it at the Nile, but that could also just be me remembering stuff because it would make it a good story.
No,
It's
he had lost his arm the year prior in the Battle of
ah
Santa Cruz de Tarif,
okay.
which was where they tried to storm the Canary Islands of the Spanish port city.
I mean, either way, Nelson was a genuine beast on the British side, and like his loss gets felt after Trafalgar.
Absolutely, no, for sure. He is to the British Navy what Napoleon is to the French Army,
Yeah,
essentially. Although, like I said, Nelsonites will cite this as one of his greatest victories, but there's a lot of arguments because of Captain Foley's out of date chart for the shoals and Goliath's actions that we're not communicated because Zealous does not immediately follow her. Goliath
yeah,
goes in through that opening alone, and then the other ships follow. It wasn't a clean maneuver. So there's a lot of debate on that, and there will always be a lot of debate, I'm sure, on it.
yeah,
But part of the problem is history is it's written by Anglophiles, and so one of the things that you have is the perpetuation of myth, and that is I will write a theory, and I won't base it on anything. It's just my opinion. But then I become a professor, and I talk about it, and now people will write books and cite me,
yeah.
and then people will cite them citing me, and you get this
Weird.
Russian nesting doll of citations. But when you get down to the absolute core of it and you open up that last doll, there's absolutely nothing that it's based on. And you see this in the Civil War from the Lost Order at Chancellorsville. You see this in Hood's response at Gettysburg. You'll see this in the Franco-Prussian War with some of the French response. You'll even see this all the way up into World War I with Verdun and some of the claims on that. You see it with the Zimmerman telegram to get America involved in World War I. There's a lot of history that is it's based on nothing, that is assumed as common parlance to be true. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do here is by offering these little shows on the age of Napoleon is to kind of cut through the bullshit and just tell you what actually happened.
Yeah. Whew. Let's see. just write an opinion like most mainstream news. Well, so it's very important to note that uh, when it comes down to history, especially, and I think that this is one of these things. It's the grand misconception: is history isn't just listing out dates and facts and names. It's about asking questions. Like the whole root of the study is about asking questions of the past. It's what history means. Is it the ancient Greek historia for inquiry. Um, so there is a lot of opinion in history, and it gets opinion becomes the basis of history the further you go back and the less sources you have. When it comes down to like classical antiquities, I would say that at least 80% of classical antiquities history is based upon opinion, because the primary sources that we cite would, by any other metric, be considered secondary in
Right, and
nature.
it's constantly evolving because of
Yeah,
archaeology. I mean, you got to remember prior to Schliemann finding Troy, everybody in
yeah.
highbrow
Everyone thought it was a
historical
myth.
circles just assumed that the Iliad was a myth, that the War of Troy was an absolute myth that never occurred. And then they find Troy, right where it was supposed to be, right where they all said it should be. Schliemann finds it and completely rewrites the book. Same
Exactly.
thing with, we are completely confident that Neolithic civilization occurred at this time and they didn't have any construction before this. And then they find Göbekli Tepe and it completely rewrites the equation because it's
Exactly.
5,000, 6,000 years older than they had thought before. So archaeology, geology is always constantly evolving. The nice part about the 19th, the 18th, the 19th, and the 20th century, we have more firsthand accounts. And so in this account, especially, we've got each individual captains, if they survived, their account of it, their written
Yeah.
reports. We've got the individual sailors, because this was a major event, both French and British sailors. We've got their accounts, both firsthand and secondhand, because most of these people.
I'm sorry, Aldous. Mo. Aldous just tosses away all anonymous sources supporting Nelson as if he was a Russian general and they were his troops.
Look, this happens a lot with British commanders. You'll see it if you're a student of World War II. You'll see this consistently with Montgomery, in that they gloss over all of the failures that Montgomery had, which is I could list them here, but this show is supposed to be on a time limit, so that ad nauseum they go on, and they
Monty
highlight
was shit.
individual successes that were not his. They were individual commanders beneath him that were doing their own actions. And he actually admonishes multiple of his subordinates for those actions that were positive. So the constant throughout British Wellington, the same thing happens at Waterloo with Wellington. Wellington gets all the credit. Blucher gets none. The Prussians showing up saved his ass. But
Yeah.
the
If the Prussians had not shown up, and they would not have shown up if their commander had not taken a serious knock to the head and ordered them to continue on anyway instead of resupply, which would have been the conventional thing to do at the time, is to withdraw and resupply before moving on. But
it's the only time in post Frederick the Great that the Prussians advance without reorganizing.
yeah,
You don't see that's not the Prussian model. Frederick the Great established the model. Oh God, who said it? Why am I drawing a blank on this? Politics by any other?
realpolitik.
No, the shoot, he wrote the book on war.
Oh,
Prussian general.
von Clausewitz.
Yes, von Clausewitz talks about this. If given the opportunity to resupply, no matter how much you can exploit the enemy, always take your time to reorganize your unit so that you have cohesion going into combat. Communication and organization and logistic supply are more important than exploiting a weakness in the opponent. He's ignoring von Clausewitz. I mean, it doesn't happen. But Blucher understood the importance of that engagement and understood why the Prussians needed to be there. Wellington didn't. Wellington didn't wait. He didn't disengage and wait for the Prussians to show up. He was an arrogant fuck that just went, okay, let's go. And that's the traditional story of every British general.
Oh, well, folks, we have reached our just about reached our hour mark. Before
Yee.
we roll out, we'll show off. I believe Aldous had at least one more thing that we had.
Yeah, we had a couple of maps that were actually period maps that were hand drawn by sailors.
Yeah,
Um,
so we'll pull up those and
and
take
I'll
a look at
talk a
those
little
real
bit
quick.
about this. So there's a great scene in Master and Commander when one of the young stewards that's on the ship, just by seeing the rear of a ship once, is able to build a wooden model of it. And these people's intelligence doesn't change. Their education level and their understanding of how the world works might change. But to be a sailor, you had to be intelligent, especially if you were a steward or an officer. And their education, while not be might be measured up to our levels, these are people that could navigate a ship with a sextant, and by the star and the moon. They knew their way around. They were intelligent people, and they're also by their nature incredibly observant. So these are hand drawn maps by people that were involved that are still at the Royal Museum in London that you can go see, and they show where the ships were and where the ships' motions were. And it, like I said, it gets cloudy, really after that fifth ship crosses the French T and crosses between the landward side and the French ships of the line. But what you do get is an accurate representation of the maneuvering that was done up to that point and where all the individual ships were. And they're incredibly accurate even today. They're very impressive
Yeah,
maps.
like you can even see just by looking like right through here. This is like the French line. You can and right over here you have the approaching British, and it matches pretty much to the exact what the modern graphic looks like.
So yeah,
So
multiple firsthand accounts. Again, you see this time and time again in actions like this. The post action reports, the maps, the details that these men were able to recall and write down is just exceptional. And part of that is because then all this information goes back to the Admiralty, and as they're training, they're going to use this information for how what went right, what went wrong, how did we. So they're constantly learning. The one thing the British did take very seriously was their naval warfare school and training officers. Not so much on the army side, on the land side that was a little bit different. But the British took great pride in their navy, and there were very forward-thinking people involved in the training.
Mobig says Monty said he wanted to put a hotel on Marvin Gardens, and well, one thing led to another. The fog of war.
Exactly.
And then Corey is saying, so would that be a flat Earth map since they didn't have Mississippi? So by this point, nobody thought that the Earth was flat. Really, by this point, you had
No
people.
sailor would, by the very nature of the horizon line.
Really? Even by
Yeah.
this, I thought that Amerigo Vespucci's.
No sailor would think that the world was flat. The
Yeah,
horizon line alone would tell them that.
yeah, no, but by this point, the whole notion that the world was that flat had been kind of nixed by the age of exploration.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so that wouldn't even be a convention held by this point, but you still have to make maps of the battleground and everything like that, and the best way to do that is through 2D cartography for this period of time.
Well, and you'll notice too that on a lot of the maps that are drawn there, it's a very small sample, so the
Yeah,
curvature actually doesn't begin to become a problem. And also, you got to keep in mind, most of the maps that are going to be drawn are based off of individuals' experiences. They're not true cartographic maps. I mean, if you pull up those two originally, they've got the river locations wrong. But the shoreline's correct, but the river
yeah,
location's wrong. And part of that could just be memory. But what you're seeing is they're referencing things that matter to them. Where the river enters or exits doesn't matter. It's where the shoal line is, and the shoal line is correct on both because that's what a sailor would recognize. Where's the land? Where's the shoal line? Where was the line? Where were the ships? Where was the positioning, and what were the maneuvers? So you're going to see aspects of maps that don't matter to them that are much more secondary. Same thing with city placement and stuff on sailor drawn maps. Cartographical maps are going to be totally different. Those are going to be extremely accurate on those things.
Yeah. Well, with us at the hour mark, really quickly, I'm going to shill Judex. We have 8 days left with $8,545 raised USD. We are 1,500 away from hitting 10K. I would really like to cross 10K before we close. So any help we can get, whether it's a backing or a share on socials, is greatly appreciated. And we've gotten a little bit of a bump here the past day as I have let people know that if you've refunded Starfield for any particular reason, because there are many reasons to refund that game, you can this would be a worthwhile investment. Take that refund money and put it towards media that matters, because we've got a great book here.
Outrage marketing.
Outrage marketing indeed, and it's worked. We've gotten 5 backers in the last day, and
Yes. Don't sell your product on its bona fides. Sell it because it isn't something else.
of course, capitalism. Find a way, find the right angle, right?
Monorail.
But anyways, we do have a fantastic book, and we have great values on our tiers. Our featured tiers probably got some of the best value that you will find on any campaign, with 2 variant covers, a an Ashcan companion crossover with Black Terror, a metal print of the cover of that Ashcan, a glow in the dark mini print, and a Lamarion coin, along with all of the other stretch goal items. And then I know that we've actually added up some of the skunk art sketch cards. One of those has already sold. We've got the Rich Ayala sketch cards have been added now as well. Oh man, that Judgment card. Ooh. And then I think did oh yeah, the original art print for the art print has been put up on the campaign as well. There's lots of cool stuff that we've been adding periodically to the campaign. So make sure you don't miss out.
Yeah. It's a great book. Everybody needs to get it.
Yes, I concur. But anyways, guys, we are going to roll out for this evening. This has been another edition of Vive l'Empereur. Next time we come, what would it would be the Napoleon going back, pretty much, right? Like that's where we're at. There's, I think, one more military engagement in Egypt before he kind of dips out and heads back to deal with the incompetence of the Directory.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you guys have a good night. Thank you, Aldous, for carrying the show. And
Always.
thank you, the chat, for being here. It was refreshing to have so many people in the chat for our show tonight.
For sure. Great to see everybody, man. Hopefully you appreciated it, learned something, and maybe we'll come back next time.
Yep.